Here's a question for you. If God lived in a room in your house, I want you to imagine that for a second. God lived in one of the bedrooms, and that was his room, and the door was shut, but you knew God was in there. How often would you go in there? When you went in there, what would you talk to him about? How would you feel before you went in there? It kind of used to be that way, you know, back in the Old Testament, the time when Israel was traveling through the wilderness. God gave directions for building a tent. If you've seen Indiana Jones, you know the Ark of the Covenant. This was given by God as a place where he would be, and he would be inside of a tent-like structure, and the ark was clear back in the back of the tent behind a curtain called the Holy of Holies was the place, the Holy of Holies, and the high priest could only go in there, and then only once a year, and if he didn't do it exactly right, he'd get struck dead. So history tells us that they would tie a cord, a string, around the ankle of the high priest, and the high priest would go in there to offer the sacrifices. He'd sprinkle some blood sacrifice on the altar there. But if he didn't do it right, he'd die, and nobody else could go into the Holy of Holies. So they would use this cord to drag his body out if he happened to get killed. It's pretty dramatic, pretty dramatic. Well, when it transitioned and the nation of Israel was no longer walking around in the wilderness, they built a temple in Jerusalem. And there they also had the Holy of Holies, and they had a curtain in front of the Holy of Holies. The first century historian Josephus, who's a Jewish historian, tells us the curtain was 60 feet high and 4 inches wide. 60 feet. It's tall and 4 inches wide, and the back there is where they believed God's presence resided. It was there, and so to get to God, the high priest could only be the one that would stand face to face with him. Well, an interesting thing happened when Jesus died, and Matthew and Mark both record this. When he died on the cross, Jesus cried out with a loud voice. This is in Matthew chapter 27, verse 50. Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, ripped open. Everybody could look in. Everybody could see it. Anybody could go in. God became accessible. I take that for granted. I mean, if he lived in a room in my house, I would probably go in there daily. I would probably go in there and get myself ready and talk to him and see what was going on and what he thought of what I was doing and what he saw me doing. Maybe give me some pieces of advice on my life, all of those things. But because he doesn't live in a room in my house, I sometimes forget he's that accessible. Because that temple was, that veil was torn in two, I can get into God's presence anytime through prayer. I can talk to him anytime, and consequently, I don't talk to him very often. I want you to imagine that God does live in a room in your house, and that you have a special place there where he kind of sits and waits for you. My belief is, and I've tried this and it works, my belief is you'll go and talk to him more often. He'll talk to you through his Bible, through his word, but then you talk back to him. It's a conversation. He says things to you, you say things to him. That's how the relationship is built, by a conversation of him talking to you, you talking to him. Honestly, openly about what's going on in your life. Contrary to the way it was in the Old Testament, today, because of Jesus, God is accessible. My hope is by being reminded of this, you'll talk to him more today. I believe you'll be glad you did, and your relationship with him will grow stronger. God is accessible.